Hi, my name is Sonalee Rashatwar. I use she and they pronouns because I identify as non-binary, and I'm popularly known on Instagram as the fat sex therapist. I am a super fat, queer, bisexual, non-binary, Indian American, second generation immigrant, documented, non-practicing Hindu, lower caste, upper middle class, East Coast for life, Jersey girl, cat mom, plant dad, and licensed clinical social worker living in Philadelphia. I am here today to talk about why fat phobia is not a sexual preference. Before we go into any content, if just upon hearing that statement you ask yourself, actually, it's okay to not be attracted sexually or physically to fat people, or not wanting to date fat people doesn't make me fat phobic. Well, we might need to talk about that. So let's get into it. Anytime we are working through unraveling internalized fat phobia, it can feel almost like a knot wanting to be unraveled. And it's helpful to know that when we interrogate that internalized fat phobia, it might come up through feelings of defensiveness and frustration, especially when looking through some of the posts that I write, especially this one on fat phobia not being a sexual preference. Typically, the way that we understand fat phobia as a structure is the same way that we would understand any other type of body-based oppression. And so when I say structure, I mean that there are two levels of fat phobia. That's the individual level and the systemic level of fat phobia. And within each of these, there are two separate types of individual and systemic fat phobia. So in the individual level, there's internalized fat phobia and interpersonal fat phobia. And within the systemic level of fat phobia, there is institutional fat phobia and structural fat phobia. I find that this four-tiered system is really important for us to really understand when we're trying to dissect the different ways that fat phobia exists across a structure laterally. Because oftentimes we only get stuck thinking about fat phobia as someone called me fat on the internet. Or, my aunt commented on how much weight I gained when I saw her at Thanksgiving. Yeah, these are both great examples of fat phobia, and we can't forget about the ways that we internalize fat phobia, not just the ways that we communicate fat phobia interpersonally, but also the institutional ways that institutions create unfair policies and discriminatory practices that perpetuate fat phobia, and how those practices happen across institutions to create structural fat phobia. We see this often in medical offices, we see it in insurance companies, we see it on airplanes. That's kind of what we think of when we think of structural fat phobia. We think of fat folks who lose their jobs to being fat. I think about fat folks who get kicked off planes. I think of fat folks who get denied insurance coverage or medical care due to their BMI status, the BMI number assigned to them. They're often refused things like top surgery or fertility treatment, which is fat phobia. That is medical fat phobia and a discriminatory practice that was created intentionally to discriminate against fat bodies. If you're watching this video in the US, then you know that the BMI, or the body mass index, is a scale, a metric, used to apply discrimination on fat individuals. So when I go to the doctor's office, I am assigned a number on the BMI scale, and depending on what number I'm assigned, that will grant or deny me access to certain medical procedures. This is called structural fat phobia, and I often go a step deeper and call it medical fat phobia. The types of surgeries and procedures that you might assume would be denied, I'm not talking about knee replacement surgery, which is absolutely a fat phobic thing to deny a fat patient to receive. No, I'm talking about fertility treatment. I'm even talking about top surgery. So someone who is assigned a higher BMI category might be denied any fertility treatment based on their fertility doctor's own fat phobia. The same can happen to a surgeon who may deny a trans client to receive gender-affirming surgery, like top surgery, due to their assigned BMI. These are both really specific examples of structural medical fat phobia. Internalized fat phobia is my favorite one to talk about on Instagram. And that's the ways that we ingest this whole structure and system and understanding the value of fat bodies, and the way that we internalize it, meaning the way that we put ourselves within that worth hierarchy. I experience this anytime I experience that pressure of wanting to go on another diet, or wanting to pursue intentional weight loss. I experience internalized fat phobia anytime I imagine that my life would just magically be easier if I were X number of pounds lighter. Internalized fat phobia for me assumes this conflation between thinness and health. Instead of actually breaking down what does health mean, what does mobility mean, what does a happy, joyful quality of life mean, instead of assuming that thinness is the epitome of really great health. It's important for us to acknowledge that the actual roots of fat phobia come from anti-Blackness and colonization. And I say that based on a lot of the material published in Sabrina String's recently published book just earlier this spring in 2019 called Fearing the Black Body. And basically what she asserts is that through European colonization of West Africa, there was this specific usage of fat phobia in order to establish a hierarchy of civilized white European and fat, savage black slaves. And in creating this binary, this hierarchy, European colonizers rationalized through things like race science and white supremacist art, they rationalized their desire to enslave people who they deemed to be savage due to their body size, skin color, assumed temperament, and based on the type of food that they ate. So that's especially why it's important when we're going to have conversations about fat phobia that they need to be linked with food. So whenever we talk about fat people, we're often talking about the type of food that fat people are eating. So anytime someone's criticizing a food based on its like presumed nutritional quality, there is usually an inherent conversation that's subtly happening in that subtext about fat people. It's hard to prove, but it's usually happening. Another way that I observe fat phobia seeping into our personal relationships is through the experience of non-consensual diets and diet trauma more broadly in general. So non-consensual diets can happen, especially to children, when they're placed on their bodies by adults, by caregivers. And I call them non-consensual because oftentimes children cannot consent to a diet that's not medically necessary without fully informed consent. I call it non-consensual because that is based on my personal experience. What I experienced as a child was being put on diets from the ages of like 8, as young as 8, 9, and 10. And I believe that I could not have consented that young to a diet. And what I experienced was it didn't feel good in my body. It didn't feel consensual. It did not feel good in my body. And so that's why I use that language and that wording. But more broadly, diet trauma we can experience this anytime we attempt a diet and we fail, meaning our body compensates for this famine that we're putting it under, and it resists the famine by making sure that it doesn't lose weight, and it maintains the body size or tries to regain the weight that was lost. Diet trauma can happen because of a lot of consistent yo-yo dieting. We can experience diet trauma by going to see several medical providers who recommend weight loss, and when we try it, we don't feel good because we were not successful at losing weight, because some of the research that the anti-diet dietitians that I admire and that I look up to and that I refer to, like Christy Harrison, just to name one, she cites research that estimates something like 95 to 97% of diets do not result, and diet meaning intentional weight loss, do not result in long-term sustained weight loss after 5 years. So that's something that's significant for us to think about, because if many of us dieters had that knowledge before trying a new diet, we might not have gone in with all of our eggs in that basket, and we might not have fallen so hard when all of our hopes and dreams were dashed by having our body save us from what it perceived to be famine. One thing that I want to make sure is stated is that sexual fetishes are not sexual preferences. And sexual orientation is not sexual preferences. So these are things I'm not talking about when having this conversation. So if someone were to say, well, my sexual orientation is that I am a lesbian, I will never tell a lesbian that they are discriminating against men if they are not attracted to men. So that's not what I'm saying here when I'm talking about fat phobia not being a sexual preference. And I'm not talking about individuals who fetishize someone's fat body, and how fat phobia is not a sexual preference there either. There are many fat individuals who consensually engage in being a fetished fat person in a romantic relationship. And that is, body autonomy overall. That is my personal motto. And I am not here to comment on adults making autonomous decisions about their own fat bodies. Never. Girl Scouts honor. Never. Am I here to keep consensual adults from doing what they want to do. What I am saying, though, is that when someone states and offers this broad statement, such as, I'm just not attracted to fat people, never have, never will be, no desire to interrogate why that statement just exists unchallenged within my brain space, those are the individuals that I want to talk to. And again, not for the purposes of forcing anyone to be attracted to me. No. This is part of a larger conversation of better understanding how we ingest fat phobia and make it part of our belief system without totally being aware of where those messages came from or how they have so seamlessly been woven into the fabric of our own personal values, beliefs, and attitudes. That's what I am here to help us understand. The fact of the matter is that our sexual preferences are not hardwired. They're actually really socially conditioned. We do have some control over the fluidity of those preferences. And I often see this when I work with clients who have experienced sexual trauma and are sometimes willfully shifting the fluidity of who they are attracted to because of their experience of trauma. So my challenge to you is, don't hide behind the excuse of sexual preference. If you're going to tell me the list of reasons why you don't date X person for Y reasons, just name it for what it is. Say that you're fatphobic. Say that you're anti-Black. Say that you're struggling with some type of racism against a certain nationality or ethnicity. Let me know that you're xenophobic. Let me know that you're transphobic. Let me know that you're struggling with some misogynoir. Let me know that you don't date people with addiction because you are really affected by addiction stigma. Let me know that you're whorephobic and that you don't date sex workers. Let me know that you're anti-native and that you don't date indigenous people. Let me know that you're anti-Dalit, Bahujan, or Adivasi and that you do not date people who are not upper caste. Hindus. Let me know that you are actually really like elite classes and you don't date poor people. Let me know that you're actually super ableist and that's why you don't date disabled people. Let me know that you're a super duper Islamophobic and that's why you don't date Muslims. Don't hide behind the sexual preference label. Don't hide behind this understanding that you are somehow hardwired to never be attracted to Muslims. No. Please acknowledge the cultural climate that is Islamophobic, that is informing that sexual preference. It is not a hardwiring. Your DNA does not know who a Muslim is. If you're watching this video and you're like, shit, I think I'm struggling with fat phobia because I will not date someone who is fat, or I am realizing that I do not experience attraction towards fat bodies. I don't find them desirable, I don't find them beautiful, I don't find them, even in artful ways, attractive. Uh, what I am not telling you as a sex therapist, as an activist, as a fat person, what I am never telling you to do is to human experiment on people by dating them and working through your fat phobia with fat people, or whatever X group of people you are wanting to work through your bigotry. Please don't do that. You will harm the individuals that you're dating, even if you don't intend to. What you can do instead, however, instead of human experimenting, is doing things like, trying some porn or erotica with different bodies. Notice what feelings are coming up for you. Are you looking at porn that is reflective of your body or the bodies of individuals who you want to be attracted to? Why or why not? So I often work with clients who are fat, who are struggling with internalized fat phobia, and what they notice is that they're often watching porn of thin-bodied individuals, of thin, skinny, slim people. And when I ask them, why is that? When we interrogate that further, sometimes it is because they have a hard time finding and eroticizing fat bodies. So an exercise that we often do together is by intentionally looking for porn with fat bodies in order to internally interrogate and ask ourselves and have this dialogue with ourselves of, hey, what's coming up for me when I watch this fat porn? Am I feeling disgust? Am I feeling aroused? Am I surprised by that arousal? Um, and how can I challenge myself to find, 2 to 3 attractive qualities about this fat body? How can I look at this fat, attractive, aroused body in this erotica, in this porn, in literature that I might be reading? And how can finding gratitude or desirability in that fat body help me to find like gratitude, peace, neutrality, stillness from my own body? Because oftentimes, what our internalized fat phobia or our interpersonal fat phobia that we inflict on others, sometimes what that's really about is our own, like, very, very deep inability to be at peace with ourselves and allow ourselves to take up the space that we need. And so when we see others being able to take up the space that their body demands, we project our own disgust with ourselves onto those other fat bodies. Sometimes that's really what our fat phobia is actually about. Thanks so much for having some curiosity about this conversation. If you are looking for more information or resources about how I even came to this conclusion of understanding internalized fat phobia, and how it's not a valid sexual preference, I'm going to offer you some names and some ideas, some places to go. So a lot of these conversations that are happening right now are actually understanding and deconstructing how social construction theory and using like social analysis to better understand how desirability politics, and so basically how sexually desirable we are as individuals, is what actually informs the way that we're treated, in the boardroom and in the bedroom at the exact same time. Desirability politics. So that's actually a concept that was written about by Catherine Hakim, and this conversation happens around the topic of erotic capital. If you're looking for more conversations around desirability politics, I'm going to name two more names. Mia Mingus, a personal fan of hers, and what she has written was a keynote address that she had given, and it is titled Moving Toward the Ugly, a Politic Beyond Desirability. And the final name that I'm going to offer you is my friend and fat savior, Caleb Luna. And the piece that I want to offer you that they have written is Treating My Friends Like Lovers, the Politics of Desirability. And what Mia and Caleb are both doing are building upon the narrative of erotic capital on what we can do to better understand how sexual desirability impacts our treatment in many hemispheres. They're trying to push the conversation forward by also helping us to understand what to do with that information. What do I do if I am a fat person who exists at multiple margins and I still want to access romantic love or any kind of love? Caleb Luna talks a little bit about how to still access love in ways that de-stratify romantic and platonic love and kind of flatten that hierarchy, and why that's so important. So these are brilliant thinkers, and I highly recommend that you look them up and learn more about these topics.